And good afternoon, everyone. For some of you, it's good evening. So we, appreciate you staying up late to talk with us. We want to welcome all of you to our community discussion on the pandemic, education, and racial justice. So my name is Donald Doan, and I'm the CEO of ConnectYard. I'm joined here today by our co-founder and COO, Dr. Grant Warner, our esteemed panelists, and our supporting staff from ConnectYard as well too. Dr. Warner and I, we started this company well over a decade ago, and our primary goal was helping schools and institutions of higher learning to bridge the digital divide. And yet I'm talking about the same digital divide that you read about today that's disproportionately impacting Black and brown students who are trying to learn remotely. But 10 years ago, that same digital divide was impacting Black and brown students who were trying to learn online. And since then, we have started an equal access initiative, and it is really a coalition of schools, foundations, corporations, people who really just want to help ensure that there is equity and excellence in education. If you'd like to find out more information about the initiative, you can email us at equalaccess@connectyard.com. And at this time, what I'll do is I will introduce our moderator, who is Dr. Grant Warner. In addition to being a co-founder of ConnectYard, Dr. Warner is also a co-founder of Zedia Labs. It's a DC-based incubation firm that provides training and technical consulting to local startups. Dr. Warner received his BS degree from Cornell, Lamad as well, and an MS degree from Penn State, and a PhD degree, excuse me, from Columbia University in Mechanical Engineering. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Warner.
Thank you much, Don, and thank you everybody from joining, and definitely thank you to our panelists. So just to kind of give a brief run of show before we start, what we want to do is have a moment of silence, really reflect on the historic moment that we're having now before we jump into the general discussion. Don has given us some of the lead in, but I want to talk a little bit more about kind of the things that motivated us to kind of form the Equal Access Initiative. And then we're going to move to a panel discussion where we're lucky to have a breadth of participants in the New York City education ecosystem. Of course, we're hoping that you fill the Q&A box with questions, because we'd like to open up the last portion of the webinar to general questions and answers, and then we'll talk about wrap up and next steps. We really think this is the beginning of a conversation. And so with that, I would like to move to a moment of silence. So we'll pause for a while, and then we'll resume. All right, thank you. So that was 26 seconds. It's hard to imagine another 8 minutes and 20 seconds went by with someone kneeling on another person's neck. I mean, it really is something else. It's one of those the moments that really crystallize is, kind of this moment in time that we're all in the same storm. We're just not in the same boat. And that's part of what drove the Equal Access Initiative. So as we looked around at the start of the pandemic, it was becoming obvious that there was this disparate impact of this moment on, Black and brown communities. This graph is the death rate from COVID-19 per 100,000 people. And you can see that this has impacted Black people really disproportionately. The death rate is about two to 2.5 times larger than other populations, right? So we're dying at twice our population share. And that really had us thinking about, well, this is the visible impact of COVID, kind of what are the invisible impacts? And even when we thought about the visible impacts, it came down to, all these are personal choices. People have underlying diseases, but it's more than that, right? There are conscious choices that we're making as a society that have led to these outcomes. Kind of the jobs that people are allowed to have, right? Impacts whether or not they can shelter in place, right? It's not possible for all people. People live in food deserts where they don't have access to healthy foods. They live in healthcare deserts where they don't have access to quality care. And it's not just that quality hospitals are not close to them. It's decisions that people are making through discrimination that impacts whether or not people die. There was an article in the Times that I've highlighted here that documents that, kind of Black patients in this case are treated differently than white patients. And those have kind of life consequences, right? People are more likely to die because of that. So it's not about personal choice that gets us to the impacts of COVID-19, right? It's these structural impacts that get us there. And when we think about those structural impacts and disparities, because we are an education company, it always brings us back to Brown versus Board of Ed, right? Separate but equal, even though we're separate and unequal, right? When we look at outcomes as expressed explicitly by achievement gaps. So what you have on the orange and green line are Black and brown students, and on the blue line are white students. And what you see is a persistent achievement gap. This one happens to be in reading, but we could cycle through different areas and see similar results, right? This is not something that is tenable, but this is a gap that existed when people were learning in person, right? Access to a teacher. What happens when we rapidly move to an environment where people are learning digitally, right? And that digital access is not equal. So this graph highlights that, well, if you're a lower income, there's a 43% chance that you're using just your cell phone for work, right? This contributes to what they call the homework gap, right? So this is a real problem. And again, it's not just about personal choice, right? Well, you eat healthier, or it's about, well, why don't you buy a computer? It's about decisions that are being made that have structural impacts. This is looking at student engagement with educational technology. It speaks in some part to the prior slide that, well, people might not have devices, but it also speaks to something else. So what you're looking at is the engagement with educational technology. And there's a marker there for when COVID-19 began. So at the very early stage, you see high levels of activity. COVID-19 hits. Of course, that plummets as people try to scramble, schools close, et cetera. It slowly begins to ramp up, not to the levels that it was at before. And you would think that that means, okay, most students have access to educational technology. But really what underlines that graph is that the haves are using educational technology more now, right? That's why it's going back up. And the have-nots are not counted here at all. Very, very troubling signal. And again, it's not just about personal choices that people are making. There are structural problems, right? Back to the separate and unequal. It's driven in part by school funding formulas, right? Which is dependent on property taxes. This is an example taken from NBC News of the Detroit area. Detroit public school system, local funding, $800 per student. Grosse Pointe, a local suburb, $5,000 per student. That's not a gap that the federal government closes, right? The money has different uses, is tied to different uses, right? This creates persistent problems. But it's not just that funding, it's also policy. One of the things that was really shocking to me as we started on this path of discovery, really trying to understand what was happening in K-12 under COVID, was how little synchronous instruction was actually happening. My expectation was that school, and it was a naive expectation, I'm sure, was that school was persisting online, much like it had when it was in person, that there was tons of synchronous instruction. It was challenging for some students, but their goal was to provide it. What we found was the opposite, that really most people were not providing synchronous instruction. And of course, it impacts those who are less fortunate worse, right? So if you have a high proportion of free or reduced lunch, right, an indicator of poverty, you're much less likely, right? Half as likely to have any synchronous instruction at all, right? Really terrible. And not only is it not synchronous instruction, they're less likely to have engagement. So attendance is taken less than a quarter of a time. Check-ins are expected almost a third of the time, right? And so because different people expect different things, almost half of the schools are doing nothing right now, right? No measure of engagement at all. And so again, coming back to where we started from, this invisible impact is talking about education gaps. What happens to this education gap? That's invisible right now. Nobody knows, right? We do know that instruction helps learning. Lack of instruction hurts learning. So how much will this gap widen and what can be done? That's kind of what brought us to the panel, right? That's the background to the panel. And I really would like to thank our panelists for making time for this important discussion. Again, their input is what really informed our understanding. We went around the country, actually we went around the world, talked to people outside of the country, really to understand what was going on. And the feedback we received changed the way that we looked at this. And so we hope to draw out some of their insights through the discussion. So I would like to take this time now to welcome our panelists, and I'll stop the screen share so everybody can see one another. So I would like to welcome Neil Wright, Assistant Principal at the Young Adult Borough Center at Abraham Lincoln High School. Thank you very much. And I'll read everybody's name off, then I'll ask you to talk a little bit about what you do. Reverend Alfred Cockfield, the founder and executive director of Lamad Academy Charter School. Pearson, division director of Good Shepherd Services. And Michelle Henry, the proud parent of a sixth grader at PS 109. So Neil, allow me to circle back to you and just tell us a little bit about your institution so people understand kind of your unique perspective of education.
So the YBC stands for Young Adult Borough Center, which was created back in 2005 for an at-risk population of 17 to 21-year-olds. Most of them are overaged, undercredited. Obviously, in New York City, 80 to 90% minorities are in our school. I've had the pleasure, and you'll hear from Mr. Pearson beneath me, who we worked together to start this school back in 2005. We were given flat budgets at that time. As time has gone on, they decreased our budget about 50%. We're still trying to come up with the same results. It's been a phenomenal journey, and one of the highlights that I always like to say is it's really, while it's about education, we're making students as well, people as well, that are going to be productive members of our society. So, you know, we work really hard, and our mission has always been a diploma is important, but just as important is let's help the behaviors and the inequalities that brought you to today to help you move forward and be productive.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Neil. Reverend Cockfield, why don't you tell us a little bit about Lamad Academy?
Lamad Academy Charter School, founder and executive director. We're launching this summer, actually July. We're doing a summer bridge program, middle school in Central Brooklyn. As you know, middle school is very difficult in the city of New York. It's very difficult. The children that come out of good elementary schools and get into gifted, talented programs catapult into standardized high schools, but those who do not start middle school 2 or 3 grades behind. And so we thought it'd be meaningful to really affect that population in Central Brooklyn. And so we're starting this summer and expecting some great things.
Fantastic.
STEAM program, by the way, sorry.
Okay, yeah, fantastic. All right. Damon, tell us a little bit about your role at Good Shepherd.
I'm Damon Pearson. I'm a division director at East Good Shepherd Services located in East New York, Brooklyn. I currently oversee East New York community programs and workforce programs. And like Neil Reich said, I started a YBC program, Young Adult Borough Center, with him. I realized it was 2005. And I also worked at Abraham Lincoln High School in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. And I currently have after-school programs, but I work directly involved with the East New York community.
Fantastic. And Michelle, tell us a little bit about your proud 6th grader PS 109, and then I'm going to start the panel discussion with you.
Thank you very much. Yes, my son Ryan Edwards, he's a genius to me. This little boy, the things he does on his, he has this game, is Geometry Dash, and he can actually play, like put different games together and create a whole run through, like an arcade game. And he learned this from just watching other videos or seeing how someone put different colors together. And he actually made it himself, you know, because he's interested in coding and engineering. That's his passion. So seeing that this boy is so brilliant to me, I just wanted to make sure that he has an opportunity to be great, because I already know he is. So that's the reason why I was looking around and trying to find any avenue to help him, you know. And it's really hard living the way we do, and, you know, being a minority and not having access to proper education, I would say. When this all started, you know, not only you have the fear of a pandemic, but you also want to do the best you can, because you don't want your child to see you, you know, inept. And that was my driving force, because I was instilling him that education is your way out of this, you know. And I'm just here hoping that whatever you guys can come up with that can actually give him a head start, just a foundation, you know, I would greatly appreciate it. So do I have a chance now to tell you how remote learning was for me?
Yes, indeed. That's exactly where we were going to go. And just as some context, Michelle reached out to Don and I, and at that time shared, you know, kind of a really powerful story of how remote learning had created new challenges in her life, and particularly around responsiveness from the school. It was really moving. Please, Michelle, yeah, please share your personal story around that.
Okay, thank you very much. You know, March 16th, when my son came home, after Bill de Blasio said that school was closed, I felt relieved, because every day sending my son out, I know it's my duty to make sure he goes to school. But then I was conflicted, because here I am knowing there's a pandemic there, and I have to send my son to school, or I'm going to be penalized. So that day I felt great. I said, okay, he's home. I'm going to keep him safe. Then the next day I received a message from the school stating that they're going to give out laptops for him to continue his studies. So I'm like, okay, that's great. I went to the school, picked up the laptop. I was given a password. I came home, got it set up, put everything together, and the laptop has no internet. Now, where I live, I have no access to internet, because, you know, I live in a family shelter, you know, and I was devastated, because that you really get the gist of reality, like, okay, this is where I am. and I'm left alone. So I reached out to the school, and they said, oh, they didn't know. They thought they were gonna, I had internet and it will help me. Anyway, I did not receive the DOE iPad until 2 weeks after. And that was it. They gave me the iPad, I set it up, and I had no idea what I was doing. I reached out to the school, and they said they're gonna upgrade everything. They did the Google Classroom. So I put in the Google Classroom, and that was it. I got bombarded with assignments and no idea how to submit work or how to get in contact with the teacher. I reached out to a few teachers, the ones that, you know, send me because they kept calling me, They kept calling me and telling me, your son is not checking in. Why isn't he online? So I had to tell them I didn't have access to the iPad until 2 weeks later. So anyway, one of the teachers told me how to get into the classroom, and it was just ELA at the time and math. The ELA, I clicked on it, and that was it. I had no other way to get on to the subjects, or I don't know how I'm gonna, you know, it's fairly new to me, and I'm not tech savvy at the time. So anyway, the teacher, I sent a message to the parent coordinator, and she reached out to the teacher, and the teacher called me and told me, you know, just write it out on the paper and just take a picture of it and click attach. I was doing that for the math and no, not for the math, for the ELA. I was just doing ELA because all the other subjects weren't in Google Classroom as yet. Then the math, I just kept getting called that, oh, he's going to get a 0. Why isn't he doing the work? So I said, I don't know how to do math. I'm not good at math, but if you can help me, I am willing to learn. So her solution was to take a picture of a math that she did on the paperwork and just sent it to me. Now I don't know how you get this work together. So I called her and I said, is it possible that you could spend maybe a couple minutes and explain it to me, because I really don't understand. And she said, oh, just look at the sample and you know, figure it out. And when you figure it out, you could send it in. I felt completely alone, because how am I gonna, you know, help my son? Because the worst thing you can say as a parent is to tell your son, I don't know what I'm doing. Because in the eyes of a child, your parent is God, right? So how can I tell my child when I'm telling him every other day, you have to do your work. Education is important. Here I am saying it, and I'm the total opposite. So I cried for a little bit, and then I gathered myself, and I said, I'm going to try to see who can help me, because there has to be something in place. So that's when I got in contact with Don, and I explained my plight to him, and he was a godsend, you know, and after that, I just try whatever I can. I say, you know what, I'm going to step up, I'm going to figure it out, I'm going to go at my pace, and really see how I'm going to get this done, because it's a challenge and we're going to get through it.
Yeah.
Not only am I trying to keep my kids safe, because you have to clean everything. I became paranoid. I started cleaning everything, wiping down everything, and then bombarded with accusations, because teachers were calling me left and right. Oh, why isn't he doing assignment? Why isn't he coming on the classroom? And it was just a lot. And it really showed me how insecure I was about myself and my limitations at the time.
I do want to say that your story really moved us. Certainly the pain that you experienced moved us, but also your dedication to do what's best for your child is really what moved us. Again, you know, there's all these counter narratives kind of in the paper about parents. And here's an example of a parent trying to do everything that she can for her child. I think that's really moving. But I want to piggyback on that thought And Reverend Cockfield, so I mean, you're in a unique position. So you have a congregation and a school, and again, you're also interacting with parents during this time. What are some of the challenges that you're hearing from your population? You're muted. Yeah.
So one of the things, and I really feel for you, sister, you know, listening to you. So what I didn't talk about, or Dr. Grant didn't mention, is that I have a private school, Christian school as well, pre-K to 5th grade. And the thing about that school is our tuition is only $5,200 a year. You calculate what that is. Nothing. And so when the governor and the mayor shut down the actual brick and mortar of schools, it took us a little while to get up and get going. But one of the things we did was make sure that our children had packages and stuff to get to them while we prepared to go online. But what I've heard from a lot of parents is that some schools, some districts, some areas that I have members of, everything is fine from day one. Some charter schools were on right away. They didn't miss a beat. They did Zoom right away. Then, of course, Zoom had to get shut down, and then it went to Google Meets. Then you have some communities, nothing was in place. Some of them still haven't got their tablets to today. And so disparity on unbelievably in 2020, just as we took a moment of silence of George Floyd, knowing that we're experiencing that in 2020, you see it everywhere. As a minister of the gospel, I see it in our hospitals, the disparity through COVID. I see it in our schools. I see it in the funding, even during COVID. The ventilators are not available in the communities of color. And so I had contracted COVID, and I kind of think I'm some type of influence in the city of New York, in the state. And being sick, I couldn't even get one of my members to clean my office help when she was in Kings County Hospital. She ended up passing away. So I've experienced it. I've seen it on all wavelengths: education, healthcare. It's just unbelievable that in 2020 we experienced. And I'll say this before, and I'll stop. Maybe 5 to 10 years ago, you heard about a lot of downsizing of hospitals. They said with the new equipment, patients don't need to be in hospitals long anymore. They're in and out of surgery, maybe 2 days versus what. And that, I realized that when we take away the old way of doing things, we have to still balance things out. Because what I realized is that the hospitals weren't prepared because they downsized all these hospitals, which means they didn't have the equipment to facilitate a full census if every bed was full. And so the same thing with schools. They didn't have everything in place. In 2020, whether you're brick and mortar or not, with all the access to social media, to all the access to the cables and OCs and all of the data we have available to us, it's unimaginable to me that in our school system in the city of New York, the greatest city in the world, the most of all the states in the U.S. depend on the money that comes from New York, that we did not have everything in place to keep every child going from March 16th forward.
That's real. I really like what you said. I mean, this is a war being fought on multiple fronts, right? You have kind of instability because people are sick and not being supported. Health, that's going to disrupt family life. Then you have educational disruption. So it's happening kind of 360 degree, right? 360 degree battlefield. And so, Dee, you're also kind of on the front line interacting with the community. So kind of what are the challenges that you're hearing from parents COVID related?
I want to echo some of the things that the mother just said. When they rolled out these devices, like not preparing them with Wi-Fi, like that's like, and then like she said, she's in a shelter, and like a lot of the kids I deal with in my population do live in shelters. where you have cinder block walls, so they can never get the Wi-Fi. Also, who's the IT department that the family goes to when the device isn't working? You know, those kind of things like that. Nobody ever thought of those kind of needs. Not understanding some of the parents themselves didn't have the best of an education, and don't understand technology. Like, you know, some parents don't even have cell phones to work on. They even do the work on the cell phone. So having not understanding the technology and also not understanding, then drop it out of school themselves. So you have parents that might have a high school child and an elementary school child that can't do the work in either kind of way. Like this one parent just said, you know, might have struggles with math and stuff like that. But some parents have a struggle with reading. Like, you know, when even they're going to have to help them fill out the, when they sign into any of my programs, help them fill out the applications because they can't read. So, you know, so that's another issue. Like no one ever thought about, like, oh, just do the work. And the kid might get an F because the parent got an F all their life too, you know? And also, like, when you have multiple kids sometimes, and it's also like, we're talking about the whole trauma of a parent having not even feeding themselves. Like, you know, yesterday I did a big food drive, and people know I do food drives like every week. We had some food that got delivered to us. It was rotten. People dumpster diving in front of me yesterday, peeling through what is not fresh or whatever, smelling it and taking the food because people are hungry. So you have a few miles to feed at home. And you know, what happens now if you lost your job and you can't feed your kids and you can't feed yourself. And these people, nobody's talking about the social emotional needs of the parents that we always trying to address in school now, like how the guidance counselors are going to reach these kids. You know, how the guidance counselors going to reach these families. We talked about like parent coordinators. How are they going to get out and reach the parents, you know? So those kind of things, like we got to look at the whole thing of the community. That some of our schools are really the safe haven for the whole family. And that once that structure went, you said the collapse of the community just collapsed. It just fell like a deck of cards, you know? So all those factors we never thought about, and it came so fast, and we never thought about how can we fix this. And now, what are you going to do going forward now, you know, with that part of the game? Like, we say we have community schools now, but are they really community schools when you don't think about the whole family? You just think about the child. Like, we got single parent homes with some parents, when some schools are requesting that the kid only be in the room by themselves, but they got 4 brothers and sisters. So how can they be in the room by themselves when you got a 2-bedroom apartment? Right. You know, and all that kind of stuff like that. And what the kids are facing, some kids are in situations where you got domestic violence every day, alcoholism, drug abuse. You have kids that have devices stolen because the family member sold it for drugs. So, you know, if this hit so hard in our communities, it was the worst thing I've ever seen since like probably when the drug era was in the 80s and 90s. That's how bad it came swept through our communities right now. This is a disease of community, not just a disease of a virus. It was a community disease.
That's powerful. That's powerful. This disease of community, and certainly anybody who grew up in New York during the 80s, kind of hearing any comparison to the crack era is, you know, kind of just devastating. But yeah, I think it's right on point. So Neil, I'm going to come to you with a slightly different question. So, you know, again, we've heard some of the strain that's put on the parents. I like what Devon said about kind of SEL for parents, right? IT for parents, whether or not they're appropriate tutors, et cetera. I guess, you know, kind of as a vice principal, assistant principal, sorry, how has your district approached the transition, and are there constraints that stopped you from doing certain interventions?
So first, kudos, Michelle. I always said, if I had a school full of parents just like you, I'd have 100% graduation rate, and kudos to you for working so hard on behalf of your children. It's not an easy process, especially now. So, you know, New York City rolled this out in a matter of 3 days, or tried to, okay? Took a month for 250,000 iPads to be distributed in some way. I'll go with some way. No IT, as many of you have mentioned already. What we tried to do is, those last few days, I created packets for students. And when I mean packets, how to get on the internet, how to look up Wi-Fi, how to go on Google Classroom, literally a sheet typed out as best I could to get them prepared or try to get them prepared for what we're into. And wasn't ready for it. You know, in a matter of 3 days, my staff and I, with a lot of help, got onto Google Classroom to try to get on, to at least get some sort of assignments up to move kids forward. So we talk about asynchronous and synchronous learning. This whole Zoom that we talked about before, we started with Zoom. My staff was laughing because I went back and forth from Zoom to Meets, back to Zoom, back to Meets, and they were getting just as frustrated as I was. You know, I'm not, you know, I'm a little bit of a dinosaur in the system, so it takes me a little longer than most, but we did the best we could. I mean, that's not good enough sometimes. Some of the challenges came from Zoom. Some of the challenges came from just a lack of software and knowledge because it was not something we were ever prepared for. Okay. And now my biggest challenge right now with the added social issues that are going on, I wish I could be there and do a webinar for my whole school at this point. Not because I know better, but that's that social emotional bond that we have with our students, especially in the at-risk role that we play. Because remember what I said starting off, this is about a diploma and education and moving forward, but it's very much about the social emotional issues that we have. And especially in these trying times too. We can't even be there for them one-on-one. Not only do they have their challenges and want to be frustrated and reach out, I don't have the platforms now to go there. You know, our kids are parents. Our kids are taking care of families. Our kids are the breadwinners for their families, okay? I can't get everyone on at 4 o'clock at night or in the afternoon with viable stories, with viable situations. So yes, you know, we missed out on a lot here, a lot of great, I'll be honest, great opportunities to be powerful in the messages that we're sending in the diverse community that I have. And we just couldn't do it for numerous reasons. And that was the most frustrating part.
Indeed. So I have a follow-up question for that. So with respect to the packets, was there any guidance sent from the Department of Ed about what what were the instructions we should provide to parents, et cetera?
So one of the biggest challenges was that different schools use a lot of different platforms. You know, some schools use the Microsoft Teams, some use Google, some used Edmentum, some used Apex, some used iLearn. And, you know, you might be in a household where there's 5 different platforms going on at one time. For some of us, it's hard enough with one platform, let alone having to do 5 platforms with 5 different people and trying to get the same information across. We weren't ready for that. You know, the city had, you know, we're trying to recruit now, and it's a big challenge.
Yeah. And one follow-up question to that. So kind of what was the policy regarding synchronous education? So kind of what were you allowed to do? What were you not allowed to do?
So one of the things I like to do is speak to a lot of my colleagues. You know, I don't have all the answers to this. Initially, principals wanted that synchronous classroom, and they demanded it. Some schools demanded it more than other schools. There was definitely not a consistency, which of course is part of that social emotional, you know, looking at your students and seeing their reactions and what they can do, what they can't do. You know, the physical piece is almost as important in the classroom when you're in front of students. You know, it's hard in this medium without seeing people and reacting to them and having them ask questions. So there was nothing in terms of synchronous demands, I guess I'll say, nothing under synchronous. And we wanted to. It was just, again, with 3 days leeway and all of the issues you've all brought up before, it met with a lot of challenges.
Okay. All right. And so I think that we've outlined quite a number of challenges. So again, so for people who are unaware of kind of the structural barriers that people had, kind of trying to transition to COVID, I think to remote learning during COVID, I think you've made some of those things clear. I'm curious, and it's open really to anyone, what are things that worked? So kind of looking at the challenges that you saw, kind of what were examples of any best practices that you'd like to share.
What I would like to say is two things. What I thought was very profound was that teachers who had great relationships with their children were online with them. Like, it was like Synchronous. They wanted to hear from that teacher, so they made sure they were responsive. Like, one of my concerns, and Dima could probably speak to this, is one of my concerns was being that the schools were closed, the children that experience abuse and stuff, because majority of the ACS cases in our city come from schools. So it's been on my mind, like what's going on with those children that may be experiencing some type of abuse right now because there's no brick and mortar situation.
Well, Neil, you want to go first now?
Yeah, listen, go ahead, Mr. Pearson.
Well, that's when some of the schools needed sometimes out. Some of the schools, we involved in a lot of schools at Good Shepherd Services. So that's where we step up. And we send our advocate counselors out and try to make those communications with those. Like my agency, we bought a lot of laptops for our young people. Like we stepped up and we supplied those things with the Wi-Fi. So it's like, that like you said, the human-to-human communication and contact, it was a little different. You might have met them at the step or the park or something like that. We started texting and those kind of things. They found out what's going on in those households. And that's when we were able to start delivering meals and tell them where we having our food drops at. But that is so key because, like you said, our schools were that safe haven. We were those mandated reporters to give that, like, hey, like the ACS, like, listen, this was going on. This child was, confident to tell us, hey, I'm getting hit or I'm getting touched or I don't even have food in the house or whatever, or my clothes haven't been washed. I know schools like Research and Service, they have a washing machine and dryer in the school. So they wash the kids' clothes on a Friday, so the kids have fresh clothes on Monday when they come back to school. So, so those kind of things when the nonprofit sectors and working, when I say a real community school step up, and those kind of things. Like Neil and I worked closely together for many years. This, like I said, this is like my brother here. And we had those kind of relationships where we call those kids, and we went to those houses ourselves, so that's one of the things that we could do. But I know a lot of people are not fortunate to have those nonprofits in those schools. So, and that's what something the schools the Department of Ed might need to rethink and start really having like these, because you only get, like cutting down the guidance counselors at schools, right? You got schools that have 4 schools in high schools and 1 guidance counselor per school. And you got 400 school roster, 800 school roster. You got, how does it happen? How can you do that? So we really think this school thing, like, the first thing they always cut, is a show called The Wire. I don't know if many of you watched. First thing they said that when the mayor needed money for funds, they said, we're going to get the money from. He said, cut it from the schools. And he said, why? Because the kids don't vote. They always cut from the schools. But that's our future we're supposed to invest in. Like, how can you do that? You cut from your future. You cut from your investment. So we got to rethink this thing, and we got to be vocal as a collective.
So, too important, just to piggyback on Damon, because I still work with Good Shepherd Services, 2 really important successes. So what we did on Fridays at our school is our counselors would call the students once, twice, 3 times a week, and they had the ability to give gift cards based on need of the students. So every Friday, not only myself, but an advocate counselor or a program director would literally sit in front of our school. And they gave out different levels of gift cards based on the needs of our students, which I thought was fantastic. Academically speaking, a couple of the successes, and it's not just, we have a high population of ENL and special needs students. And some of the success stories, which just how dedicated the teachers are, is they would go one-on-one on Zooms with students in those populations. We set aside times and classrooms. Again, major challenges to set up. It took a couple of weeks, again, for all the reasons we've been talking about. But, those were really powerful relationships that allowed students to get through this time. And like we've all been saying, it's not just about the academic need, it's a social emotional need. That might have been the one person they spoke to during the day. We made a special point of calling. Kids were being called every day, whether it was a guidance counselor, advocate counselor. I even have paras and aides that did that kind of stuff. Because it's not just about, are you keeping up with your work, but it's certainly about the social emotional needs that you have with all of these issues that are coming up. So those are very powerful.
And Michelle, I know you started us off with challenges that you experienced. Was there anything that worked really well for you? You know, was the school responsive in some unique way that you think represents a potential best practice?
Yes, actually. Now, I think they just needed to get the hang of it. I think it was fairly new to them as well. But now, my son's teacher, speech teacher, she actually every day give him a riddle because she knows he loves riddles. I didn't even know my son loved riddles. And every day she interacts with him. She calls him 3 times a week. And, you know, when I started speaking, I told you about the game. And I only say that to say this. The device, learning from the device to him is brilliant because if he's reading a passage and he doesn't know a word, he can actually click on the word and look it up on Google. So right now we're getting the hang of it. We find our groove now, and now we're handing in assignments. Now the teacher is more transparent because there's a lot of bumps along the way in terms of work. Some of the work they send, it's either freezing or it has an error. Some of the apps are still downloading now since the day we got it. But I like it. I really like this way of learning because it's also helped me. I'm more connected to the school. To me, it's the epitome of transparency with a school because now I can talk to them and there's a paper trail, you know, so they can't say, okay, this didn't happen, you didn't do this, when we're telling you, okay, this work is not, it has an error in it, the PDF, can you resend it? And they're doing it, and I just think it's going to be great as long as all the kinks get knocked out. I think it's going to be great because it's helping me as well. I'm learning as well, you know. So.
That's really fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And you know, it's interesting. Even in our discussions, kind of we heard of. So we spoke to a principal who said, "Well, the UFT has told our teachers that they can't do the synchronous learning." But her message to her teachers was, "The UFT is not going to get between you and me, right? We have a relationship and we have an obligation to our students. So you need to do that outreach, the type of outreach." That Michelle was talking about, where teachers are individually reaching out to students multiple times a week, even though they might not be having that synchronous class session. So I think that's really powerful. There's a question in the Q&A that I think kind of relates to this a little bit. And it's, well, you know, kind of what is well, 2 parts. I'm going to change it a little bit. So what is the engagement of students with the learning management system, and how do you see it? So I'll direct it first to Neil and Reverend Cockfield. If you are using one with your schools, you can also address that. So yeah, go ahead, Neil.
So predominantly we're using the Google platform. I've always engaged in Inventum and Plato as well. The students who began the semester on Inventum or Plato, they did that in the school while we were there in January and February. So that was a fairly seamless transition. You know, once in a while, you might have a science class that you need to have an updated computer for different labs and things. The transition to Google was a challenge because, you know, to find email addresses, to find proper domains alone became an issue. In the at-risk system I'm in, we didn't have a general platform for email addresses, something as simple as that. Some of the students who come to my school go to a school during the day as well, almost like a traditional night school from the old days. They had their domains from their day schools, and they had to create a whole separate domain for night schools. So we're just adding different levels of issues and things in the way that prevented us from as successfully using as we wanted to, because it took weeks sometimes to get all those pieces in place.
And so how are you able to measure, I guess, what is engagement in that environment? So kind of what do you measure as engagement? Okay,
so I've always been a fan of a portfolio assessment concept, whereby if we were in the classroom at the moment, you know, there'll be products and portfolios each and every night, because it is still a I'm a kind of a fan of a holistic grade because not everyone fits in the same box in a non-traditional rubric format. So I tried to do the same thing online. And again, we have 3 days to prepare for this. So the best we can do with this is in the number of nights we were in our nights. Now, our students come, it's almost like a college schedule. So they have maybe a Monday, Wednesday schedule and a Tuesday and Thursday schedule, 2 separate, 6 different teachers. They would have assignments posted and the teachers would have office hours. Okay, and that's how we try to do it within the time frame. Now, let's be careful here because reality is also all the things we've been talking about.
Yeah,
Responsibilities at home, supporting the home, supporting their own children, supporting brothers and sisters, feeding the families. I mean, these are the real issues in the at-risk older population that I deal with. But one of the positives, again, was that they could do the work anytime, the asynchronous part of it. They could have done that, and we were getting, it's funny, it's all on my phone, so I'm connected to it. I get dings at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. So on the positive side, in my population, I think there was some success because they could do it at any time and they weren't held down to a brick and mortar bells and times concept.
Yeah. Okay. Reverend Cockfield, any thoughts on that?
So we so depending on the grade, so the 3-year-olds, they use Dojo a lot, the pre-K, and some Google Meets. Because one of the things, as we talk about social emotional, you saw the difference when children were able to get on together with their classmates versus just getting an assignment. You see the excitement when they're in the classroom with all the other children and being able to communicate with them. So I made sure the teachers did that 3 times a week where the children actually came in the classroom to make sure they interact because they need that social emotion. They're home all the time. They're not getting out. And, family, we get frustrated with each other being in the same house all these days. So you need that time outside. So I made sure that the teachers were deliberate and intentional about that. So they use Google Meets, they use Zoom, and they use Dojo, and they use some other stuff because Go Math in terms of work with students and stuff like that. But I think for the most part, I think what was more profound is that the children being able, especially the young ones, being able to see their classmates, because you don't want to see children begin to start losing things besides their curriculum and instruction. Just the normal way of doing things shifts, right? Their discipline of being in the classroom, discipline of being listening to their teacher, having discipline for going to the bathroom versus everything can go crazy if you're not giving them structure, discipline. So I think some of the things, but I think what was profound was that the children being able to see their classmates, and then also giving teachers an opportunity to also to unload if they need to. So give them the mental health space with the other teachers and have them talk through stuff, because what people, when you think about children, some of their parents are healthcare workers. Some children lost grandparents, and they're dumping all this stuff on their teachers. And where do these teachers let it go? Like where's their outlet? And so I wanted to be mindful of that to be able to give them a space as well.
All right. So I'm going to close. We have 3 questions that I'm going to field from the audience, and then we'll wrap up. So there was one question about, well, we've heard some anecdotal stories of best practices. Has there been any effort to track kind of how this is happening district and system-wide? So are you required to report any of these things up, in a way that creates systematic change?
So I guess they started out with just the concept of engagement, and then they loosely and broadly brought down different elements of what represents engagement. It talked to a lot of things. It talked to academics and social emotional. Okay, it's not as simple as just doing an assignment. Did we reach out to the students? One of the platforms I have actually for the school is a Salesforce system where we can input almost any type of data into it and create stuff, things in there. So, did we speak to the students? Did we document social emotional issues and problems? Academically, Google Classroom has their own class book. In some ways I kind of liked it. It was very, very, very transparent, in the portfolio thing, the portfolio idea I was talking about before. So as far as district-wide. It was really just about the engagement piece per week, making sure we were engaging students.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. That's great. Again, Al, do you have a reporting requirement as a charter school? I guess the Christian school is private, so you don't have a reporting requirement.
You still have some. You have some type of reporting, but what when school shut down, we were getting ready to start our ELA and math exam. So that no matter what you say, people say, parents look forward, especially those who are engaged. They look forward to see those scores, what that would be. And so one of the other tests we do in our private school is Terra Nova, which they were able to do that. That was before we do our ELA and math. So we're waiting for those results to come back because parents want to be able to judge, especially those who are engaged, where's my student versus when they start in September. Where have they gained or where have they lost? They want to know. So even though we hold ourselves accountable for that.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. There's another question that says, okay, well, how do we fix this? So I want to take that and just broaden the question just a little bit. So what things are needed? So again, as we think about the transition to the fall, kind of what are the identified needs and what are the opportunities? Again, I think in the audience, we have a variety of people, some people from startups, some people who are funders, kind of what are the things that you need? Corporate America, what are the things you need?
So there is definitely a need as we, took 3 days to create this. And, the New York Times wrote an article this past weekend on how much of a failure it was. Just understand that I guess it has to start out with differentiated software. When I use the word differentiated, we have so many different levels of students. I mean, not only in my school, but in any school. And it really has to speak to all students. Google Classroom is about teachers creating assignments. That could be videos and that could be, reading. It could be anything. But that certainly does not help differentiate for all levels of students. And especially in the at-risk communities, we're dealing with, I think I have at least 70% ENL special ed. Okay. So we really have to differentiate, and especially, as social events have evolved, we also have to be much more culturally sensitive in what we're creating and how we're creating it. Right now, there's not a whole lot there, and that's definitely something in my community that I would love to see.
Oh, fantastic. Dee, any thoughts?
We need more spaces like this where we have to have these conversations, where you have people that have influence in these rooms also really having the voice of the community and involved in the development of how education should be. If you don't have the voice from the people that we're trying to educate, then what are we doing? We're just throwing darts into the wind, like trying to figure it out. So if you don't, you got to give people the voice. You got to give them the room where they have these discussions, so they can advocate for themselves and tell you, people know how to fix themselves. So let's stop trying to tell people how to fix themselves. Let them get the time and space to help fix themselves. And then you'll start seeing the change. You have them at the table, every single school, every single Department of Ed meeting, to have really people at those tables making those decisions, those key decisions. And how to structure the education, the social emotional learning of this. And also and those same people with funders, those people with power and money need to be in those rooms, and also have maybe those same people from those communities on their boards when they make the decisions where they're gonna send their money to. And how to send it,
It's fantastic.
One of the things we want to also be mindful of is, as we think about New York City schools, which is 1.1 million, we can honestly say it's about 400,000 to 500,000 students that suffer from the funding source in their communities. And so we think about how much went to the police department, $1 billion since Mayor de Blasio came in. If you took just half of that, what the difference would be in those communities that have the wraparound service, children to be met holistically. As Demon talked about, the so-called community schools, are they really community schools? Are they meeting the child holistically, the ones that need, like Neil's talking about? There are things that if these children have it, they'll be able to be productive in terms of learning and moving forward. So they need to restructure their funding source. You know what it is? They have so many layers of management. If they just took out some of those layers of management, that'd be enough money to fund those areas.
All right, there's a rallying point for everyone, right? Start advocating locally. I mean, there's all this momentum about defunding police. We need to defund police, refund education, right? So, yeah, I like it.
And just one thing, Dr. Warner, I know one of the questions here actually brought attention because we're having conversations about things that are happening here locally in New York, but we've had conversations with administrators of schools and universities literally all across the world. And these problems are pervasive. Even one of the questions that's highlighted here, it talks of, this young lady that's from South Africa, mentioning how in South Africa, it's Blacks there who are most disadvantaged when it comes to online and distance learning. And we've seen that firsthand because we're working now with the government of South Africa, and they're having similar access issues where they have cases where there's no internet, there's low internet, or there's slow internet. They're having problems with access around devices. So we need to start having these conversations, yes, within our communities, but we also need to understand that these types of issues and challenges are pervasive. So I just wanted to make sure that we highlighted that.
Yeah, indeed. All right, now in the interest of time, I'm going to bring it to a close because I'd like the people in the audience to join us again. So you'll know that we're going to do this for an hour, and when we say an hour, we mean an hour. So, but I'm going to close it by answering one of the questions that was in the Q&A, and it was, well, what is the role of corporate America? And I think when we were thinking about equal access, it's a partnership. I think, kind of, it was brought up in this discussion, well, we need to activate community, and community is families. Community is also, companies, right? It's that tax base. It's their responsibility too. So through equal access, we're asking any partner. So if you think you have an asset that you can bring to bear against this problem, if it's money, then make the donation, right? So we have nonprofits here that are, and I, kind of one of the best practices I would share is I've seen posts of Damon out there giving out food, right? Kind of out in the community. So there are nonprofits that need donations, right? There's schools here that are saying, hey, we need resources. There's a role for everyone to play. What we hope to host is a series of these conversations that lead to action. Again, whether that organization is formed by the collective here, whether the collective here ultimately joins another organization, we want there to be action around this because we think everyone should have the right to a quality education. They should be supported 360 degrees, social and emotional learning in addition to academic learning. So if you want to get involved, please email us at equalaccess@connectyard.com. We want to thank you all for joining the conversation. We want to give a special thank you to our panelists for really providing rich insight, some of the same insight we got from the one-on-one conversations that you've shared now more broadly. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All right, back to you.
So are we on? Do I get off from there?
Yeah,
All right.
Absolutely.
Mike, you shut everything down?